Okay, so just as a background to the teleological argument, if you think about human reasoning, it might be useful to divide human arguments into two kinds, deductive and inductive. Okay, and let's first think about deductive reasoning. Maybe you've heard of this before. Deductive reasoning is maybe reasoning from the top down or from general principles to specific instances. Maybe that's the easiest way to think of it. And deductive reasoning provides us with certainty. So you could think of the classic syllogism, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. This is a classic version of deductive reasoning. We are reasoning from generals to specifics, from general principles to particular instances. And basically, we've stipulated in the first premise that a particular characteristic is true of all members of a particular demographic class. And then in the second premise, we stipulate that Socrates is a member of that demographic class. Therefore, Socrates must exhibit or manifest the characteristics of the members of that demographic class. Okay, it's a logical progression that results in a syllogism that gives us 100% certainty. Okay, the opposite of deductive reasoning is inductive reasoning. And actually, the teleological argument for God's existence is an inductive argument for God's existence. And inductive reasoning does not provide us with certainty. It provides us with probability. Okay, probability. So for instance, let me give you an example of an inductive argument. An inductive argument is the usual argument of science. Science does not use deductive reasoning. It uses inductive reasoning instead. All observed zebras have stripes. This is a zebra. Okay, therefore this zebra has stripes. Notice the keyword observed. That clues you in to the fact that this argument is not an argument reasoning from generals to particulars. It's rather an argument reasoning from particular instances or particular cases to general principles. Okay, so if all the zebras that everybody has ever seen all have stripes, that does not necessarily mean that all zebras as such have stripes. It does not mean that zebras necessarily have stripes. Okay, it simply means that all the zebras we have seen have stripes. There could be potentially other animals that fulfill the category designation zebra that do not have stripes. So in reasoning from inductive particulars, the observed zebras, to general principles, okay, what we actually find ourselves doing is making probability-based conjectures. Now, I'm very, very, very certain that this zebra must have stripes, if indeed it is a zebra, because the overwhelming majority of zebras have stripes. But you know, we actually do have some instances of a few zebras who don't. Albino zebras that maybe don't fulfill a particular coloring expectation. I'm not sure. Okay, but the point of the exercise is just that inductive reasoning can give us certainty. Sometimes really, really, really high certainty, 99.999% or something even higher sometimes. But it can't ever give us 100% certainty. Okay, so to give you just one last illustrative example of this. Okay, so I have in my hand a little stub of chalk. Okay, and I'm going to let go of the stub of chalk, and what do you think is going to happen to the stub of chalk?
It's gonna fall.
It's going to fall. You sure about that?
Yeah, 100%.
100%? You sure? It's 100% certainty.
Yes. It has not failed yet.
Has not failed yet.
What's a law of physics?
Yeah, and you know what? It's a probability-based law.
It's not a problem. I mean,
Oh, yes, it is. We could drop it and see.
Yeah, show me. Show me. That's probably.
You guys are right. You guys are right. But you know what? The basis for us saying that it's going to fall, is actually that it's always done it before. Okay, in your experience, in my experience, in our collective experience, it has always fallen. And so we posit on that basis a law of physics, in particular the law of gravitational attraction, first mathematically formulated by Newton, of course. We posit a particular law of physics to describe it, but our law of physics, we call it a law, but it's not actually a 100% certainty style law. It's a probability-based argument. The argument is that every time before, we have seen gravitational attraction cause bodies to come toward each other. And on this basis, we reason that this will happen in the future. Okay, now, nobody in their right minds would actually deny gravitational attraction as being something that is very, very likely to happen. But notice that the structure of the reasoning here is probability-based and not deductive. It is not 100% certainty. It's more like 99.999 whatever certainty. Okay, now why does this make a difference? It makes a difference, very much makes a difference, when you talk about things like the teleological argument for God's existence. Because although the teleological argument can provide us with very, very strong conjectures about particular conclusions, it does not provide us with certainty. Let me give you some general outlines of what the teleological argument looks like, and then we'll look at a version of it on a PowerPoint. Okay, the teleological argument is based on the intuition that when you find something that is complex, it stands to reason that there is a complex designer behind it. Okay, so goes the argument. So if you were to find an iPhone, a very complex electronic device, obviously, your natural conclusion would be that some complex process and complex designer brought this product about. Okay, you would not, I presume, naturally conclude that a bunch of non-complex creatures working together brought this about, right? So monkeys didn't make the iPhone, humans did. Monkeys working together for a long, long time couldn't make an iPhone. Okay, the reason why we naturally gravitate towards the conclusion that there must be an intelligent source for this complex product is that whenever we have encountered complex products before, we have always ended up seeing intelligence behind them. Okay, and the argument from design, or the teleological argument, just says the world and the universe are incredibly complex. Really, 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 really complex. And where there is complexity of that kind, the more probable explanation is a complex designer, rather than that the universe happened by chance or processes that are non-complex working together, even if given eons of time. All right, that's a long explanation for background info. Let me stop and ask if there are comments or questions so far about that. Does everybody kind of track it so far? Kind of, sort of? Yeah. Okay, we're going to look at a PowerPoint, which will make some of these ideas clearer. But are there questions about the background materials here?
Wait, deductive is probability based.
No, it's the opposite. Inductive is probability based, yes. So inductive reasoning reasons from particular cases to general instances. Okay, so if I see, let's say I see this zebra with stripes, and that zebra with stripes, and that zebra, 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 right? And I think to myself, wow, they all must have stripes. Okay, I actually cannot say with 100% certainty that all zebras have stripes. All I can say with certainty is that all of the observed zebras that I have ever seen have stripes. Not that zebras have stripes as such, because I'm taking particular cases of individual zebras and I am drawing general conclusions from those particular cases. Okay, I think that might help a little bit. Good. Other questions about the background materials here? And one more pass, the teleological argument for God's existence is like this reasoning. It is not deductive reasoning. Okay, it is more like probability-based reasoning on the basis of particular cases. Let's look at a PowerPoint now, and this is just a version of the teleological argument using contemporary physics. It is not, of course, the only version of the teleological argument, but it is a version that I think will be. We're going to wade a little bit into the weeds of physics, so I hope you've got some background info. Did you guys take physics in high school? Yes. What sciences did we take? Biology has been increasing in popularity in recent years, biology and chem too, so people, I guess, aren't taking physics as much these days. But, you know, if you took, like, basic chem, then you know the essentials of atoms and so forth. All right, so the fine-tuning design argument, an argument from physics and cosmology. The word fine-tuning just means what it sounds like. The idea is that the universe has been finely calibrated or fine-tuned in a way that is incredibly precise. So the design argument is the oldest and most common argument for the existence of God both in the East and in the West. You can find it in India, you can find it in Greece, and Aquinas is the figure we're looking at today. He's not the originator of the argument, but he did articulate things in a very impressive and systematic way. Fine-tuning. What is fine-tuning? Well, in the last 50 years or so, scientists have discovered that the universe is analogous to a biosphere. Its basic structure must be precisely set for life to exist. This is called the fine-tuning of the cosmos. Okay, what is meant here is just that things have to be really finely calibrated in order for life to exist. How finely calibrated? Well, it turns out they have to be really, 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 really finely calibrated. So much so that the appearance of design is very strong. But again, it's not a demonstration that design is actually the case. It's just a probability-based argument for the appearance of design. The Arizona biosphere was a human attempt to fine-tune. Everything had to be constructed and set just right for it to be self-sustaining. Even then, it failed in 2 years. 3 types of fine-tuning for life will be looked at in this presentation. Fine-tuning of the laws of nature, fine-tuning of the constants of physics, and fine-tuning of the initial distribution of mass energy of the universe at the time of the Big Bang. Okay, now I am going to wade a little bit into the weeds of physics, but I won't get too technical about it. I'm just going to describe some general purpose characteristics. First, a background assumption. Embodied conscious life requires stable, reproducible complexity. And the reason for that assumption will become clear in the course of the presentation. Let's talk about the fine-tuning of laws. The laws of nature are what are at stake here. To say that the laws are fine-tuned means that the universe must have precisely the right set of laws in order for highly complex life to exist. In other words, it's got to be really precisely calibrated for highly complex life to exist. Examples of such laws? Well, the law of gravitational attraction, like I mentioned a minute ago, but also other things like the electromagnetic force, the strong nuclear force, the principle of quantization, and we'll talk also about the Pauli exclusion principle. All of these have to be very finely calibrated within a particularly narrow range of possible of possible structures in order for life to exist. First of all, gravitational attraction. Obviously, without gravitational attraction, many of the fundamental bodies of our universe would not have been able to come together and form, including stars, which would not have been able to form if gravitational attraction did not cause different masses to tend to connect with each other. Electromagnetic forces, quite obviously, have to be present in order for embodied conscious life to exist. If you remember your structure of the atom, atoms have protons and neutrons in their nucleus. They're surrounded by various different electrons in different orbitals, s orbitals, p orbitals, etc. Okay, and the proton-neutron structure in the nucleus is positively charged, and the electrons in the various different orbitals, the number of electrons, of course, is dependent upon the number of electrons, of course, determines the atomic number. The electrons in the orbitals are negatively charged. Okay, the electromagnetic force is what holds different atoms together in the form of chemical bonding. It is what provides us with a variety of different chemical setups and makeups that we encounter in nature and have made ourselves. Okay, the electromagnetic force is what keeps the atomic structure together in such a way that life ultimately can exist. Okay, so without it, you wouldn't have embodied conscious life. The strong nuclear force, to go a little bit further into the nature of the atom, what holds the nucleus together? After all, protons are positively charged and like charges repel each other, right? At the center of the atom is a bunch of positive charges together. So why wouldn't the nucleus just fly apart because protons would repel each other? Well, the answer is that they are held together by a force even stronger than the electromagnetic force, the strong nuclear force, which prevents the nucleus from breaking apart. The strong nuclear force is of essential importance to the ability of atoms to coalesce. I hope I haven't lost people so far. Everybody kind of following this? You guys sort of know the structure of atoms already? Kind of, sort of? Okay, good, good. Fair enough. Okay, the principle of quantization. The principle of quantization is responsible for there being fixed orbits within an atom. Without going too far into the details, supposing this is a nucleus here, and the electrons orbit in various different orbitals. Okay, why don't the electrons fall into the nucleus if the electromagnetic force is attracting them to the protons in the nucleus? Okay, electrons would be sucked into the nucleus without the principle of quantization. Okay, an electron should always radiate its energy away as it orbits the nucleus. Eventually, the electron should collide with the nucleus and annihilation should occur. Okay, but the principle of quantization is something that we find in nature. It allows for stable atomic orbitals. It was first proposed by Niels Bohr in 1910, and it prevents these electrons from falling into the nucleus by virtue of electromagnetic attraction. All right, so the point just being, it's a very precisely calibrated principle that has to be present in order for embodied conscious life to exist. Here's another one, the Pauli exclusion principle. Without the Pauli exclusion principle, all electrons would fall into their lowest orbitals, and hence there would be no complex chemistry. The existence of electrons in orbitals that are further out from the nucleus are what enables the different chemical elements to exist and to manifest their diversity. Okay, the Pauli exclusion principle, though, dictates that only 2 electrons can occupy an orbital, and this prevents electrons from falling into their lowest possible orbitals. Without them, we would not have complex chemistry and certainly not complex embodied conscious life. The conclusion of this investigation of the laws of nature is that precisely the right laws are needed for highly complex life to exist. If one of these laws were missing, such life would be impossible. All of the laws that we have looked at have to be very finely calibrated. gravitational attraction, electromagnetic force, the strong nuclear force, the quantization principle, and the Pauli exclusion principle. Okay, pause for breath. Questions or comments so far? Have I totally lost people with the physics discussion? Yep. Oh, I lost you?
Yeah, you got it.
Oh, I'm sorry, man. Okay. All right. Well,
I thought I was done with physics last semester. I was like, thank my lucky stars not coming here.
sorry,
You lost
man.
me at, like, electrons falling into the nucleus.
Oh, I lost you at that point when I started talking about details like that. Okay. Okay. So I have to wade into the details a little bit in order for us to see the complexity that is present in these laws of nature. So I have to show us a level of detail that is sufficient to demonstrate that. But you don't have to remember the specifics of the particular laws, like the Pauli exclusion principle that I'm talking about, in order to understand the gist of the argumentation here. Yes?
Is that why people rely heavily on evolution, like as a kind of crutch? Because they feel that like we weren't, like the world wasn't built for us, but we were adapting to the world.
Okay, sure. So the question is about what motivates people's interest in the theory of evolution. So I'm a theistic evolutionist. I think that God created the world and used evolutionary processes to bring about what we see around us today, the diversity of nature, etc. I actually think that, and I might be stepping on some toes here, I actually think that to hold to evolution as a process of natural descent without referencing a divine figure is to hold to an account of evolution that does not explain substantial developments that pretty clearly I think would have been impossible without design guiding the process. This is something, though, what we're doing in this particular lecture is something that is more of a meta-analysis of microparticles that are below processes of evolution which have occurred at a more sensorially tangible level. This is all stuff that we have found over the last 150 years that we can only observe through complex instrumentation like electron microscopes and things like that. Okay, did I totally lose you, man, or are you still on board?
No, I get it.
You get it. Okay. Yeah, so...
No, I just like, because evolution, like, I don't want to get into that.
Yeah. I guess I should say this. Don't go to the admin or anything when I say I'm a theistic evolutionist, but I think that a very robust case can be made for saying that God created the world and used evolutionary processes to bring about the common descent that we see. The only other explanation, I think, is, if you're a theist, is that God created the world with the appearance of common descent, because the appearance is overwhelming. You can look at numerous different processes in the fossil record that suggests common descent and mechanisms of natural selection. Why? I mean, I suppose God could have created the world with the appearance of common descent, but not actually have chosen that as the mechanism. But there are all sorts of other explanations that would then have to be answered about why God would deceive us by creating a world that would appear a particular way without it actually being that way. The evidence of extreme age and extreme age and long-standing complex descent is kind of overwhelming when one looks at the natural world. Okay, let us talk about the constants of physics. You thought that it was technical a minute ago. It's actually going to get a little more technical, but I'll go slowly. And again, the point here is just that the technicality suggests design as an intent. That's the argument here. It's a probability-based argument. What are the constants of physics? Well, they are the fundamental numbers that occur in the laws of physics. Many of these must be precisely adjusted to an extraordinary degree for life to occur. One example is the gravitational constant, which has to be very precise. It determines the strength of gravity in Newton's law of gravity. Here's the equation describing Newton's law of gravity. Two masses separated from each other at a distance r, okay, are described by the force F. An increase or decrease in g, and the force of gravity will correspondingly increase or decrease. The force of the gravitational the gravitational constant has to be incredibly precisely calibrated for this particular equation to hold. How fine-tuned is the strength of gravity as given by the gravitational constant? Well, to answer that, let's look at the range of force strengths that we can find in nature. We can find the strength of gravity and compare it to the strength of other things like electromagnetism, the weak nuclear force, the strong nuclear force, right? It has to be very, very finely calibrated is the point of this exercise. Okay, and here's just an illustration of that. If one increased the strength of gravity by 1 part in 10 to the 34ths of the range of force strengths, then even single-celled organisms would be crushed, and only planets less than around 100 feet in diameter could sustain life with our brain size. Such planets, however, could not contain an ecosystem to support life of our level of intelligence. So it requires a question, right? It leads to the question, why is gravitational strength so precisely calibrated? Okay? Why is it so precisely calibrated? Is it design? Or is it chance, which could be the only other explanation? Is that it just happens to have been precisely calibrated in this way. Okay, here's my illustration of gravity that is too strong. Okay. If one increased the strength of gravity by 1 part in 10 to the 37th of the range of force strengths, then we would have no long-lived stable stars. This would hugely decrease the chance of conscious embodied life evolving. Okay, you basically kind of have to have long-lived stable stars. Stars that exist for longer than 1 billion years. Obviously, without our own star, embodied conscious life would never have arisen because of the essential role in the development of the impartation of nutrients, the development of nutritional materials, et cetera, that we as a species use in order to survive. Thus, in order for life to occur, the strength of gravity must fall within an exceedingly narrow range of values compared to the total range of force strengths. It has to be very, very, very precise. Again, the question, why is it so precise? Why is it this particular way? Is it chance, or was there design here? The fine-tuning of the cosmological constant, okay, it's the same setup here. I'm going to move through this a little bit faster. I think I'm probably starting to bore you guys with all the physics. Okay, but the cosmological constant is a term in Einstein's theory of gravity that influences the expansion rate of empty space. Unless it is within an extremely narrow range around 0, the universe will either collapse or expand too rapidly for galaxies and stars to form. It has to be really precise, in other words. Okay, let me just move here to the next section. Okay, many of the constants of physics must fall into an exceedingly narrow range of values for life to exist. If they had slightly different values, no complex material systems could arise. This is widely recognized. Here's an example. Stephen Hawking, who everyone has heard of, yes? Okay, passed away a couple of years ago. Here's a quote from him in his book, A Brief History of Time. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers, that is, the constants of physics, seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. Here's another example from Dennis Sciama, very famous cosmologist. If you change a little bit the laws of nature, or you change a little bit the constants of nature, it is very likely that intelligent life would not have been able to develop. Again, the question, why is everything so precisely calibrated for embodied conscious life to exist, life of the kind that we represent? Again, the fine-tuning of the initial distribution of mass energy. I'm going to zip through this. Here's a quote from Roger Penrose, a theoretical physicist on this topic. In order to produce a universe resembling the one in which we live, the creator would have to aim for an absurdly tiny volume of phase space of possible universes. This is an incredibly tiny number, about 1 to the 10th to the 10th to the 123rd of the entire volume for the situation under consideration. Okay, and yet that is the world in which we exist. This is a calculation from Penrose. For those of you who weren't able to follow the physics, maybe an analogy would help. According to Penrose's calculations, the precision of the Big Bang explosion must be much greater than that needed to blow up a pile of rubble and obtain a fully formed building replete with desks, tables, chairs, and computers. So if we were to blow this up and result in a building of this particular style with tables, desks, computers, and chairs, we would be looking at a kind of a probability scenario that would be similar to the level of probability that you're looking at when you see the constants of physics and the initial distribution of mass energy.
Wait, okay, you just said if we were to blow up a
If you
pile-
blow up this pile of rubble and end up with this building as a result of the blow up, that's the level of, like, it's incredibly improbable, right?
Yeah, but
like-
is it possible still?
Yeah, you could do it. It's like 1 in the, like, trillion. But yeah, you could do it.
So that's basically what the Big Bang is?
So the point is just that the odds that everything would be this finely calibrated, the odds that we're looking at, this is just an analogy, right? But they're kind of like the odds of blowing this up and getting this as a result. It's really, really improbable that you could do this and get that. And it's really, really improbable that a universe would be designed with laws of nature and constants of physics and initial distributions of mass energy that would be this precisely calibrated for embodied conscious life. Okay, before I do a quick recap and talk about possible explanations for this, are there questions? Let me pause and make sure we're all on the same page. I don't want to, I know I got a little technical in today's PowerPoint, so I don't want to leave anybody behind. Are there questions or comments? Notice where the physics ends and the philosophy begins. So the physics says, look, here are the laws of nature, here are the constants of physics, here is the initial distribution of mass energy. These are the facts about these things. And the philosophy begins where you try to explain why stuff is the way it is. The philosophy begins when you ask, well, why is the law of gravitational attraction? Why is the electromagnetic force? Why is the strong nuclear force? Why are they so precise? If they had been just slightly different, you would not have had the universe that we have had, and you would certainly not have the possibility of embodied conscious life like us. It seems like everything was calibrated just for us, for embodied conscious life. Again, this is not some sort of egocentric, arrogant trip to say it was all done for us, but that seems to be the case. If anything was slightly different, then you wouldn't have embodied conscious life like us. It seems to have been made just so that creatures like us would emerge on the scene. So we have looked at the fine-tuning of the laws of physics, the fine-tuning of the constants of physics, and the fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe. Let me zip through this. Okay, and how can we explain the fine-tuning? So the question now is, like, what are we to make of this? How do we explain all this? To many people, the evidence of fine-tuning immediately suggests divine design is the explanation. This is true both for theists and non-theists. In other words, when people actually look at the evidence and notice how fine-tuned the universe appears to be for embodied conscious life of the kind that we represent, both theists and non-theists initially conclude that divine design must be the explanation. So for instance, Paul Davies is a non-theist who says that divine design is the common sense interpretation of fine-tuning. The impression of design is overwhelming, he has written. Or Fred Hoyle, after discovering, for instance, one of the first purported cases of fine-tuning, the late astrophysicist Fred Hoyle said, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect has monkeyed with physics and that there are no blind forces in nature. However, there are alternatives to a theistic explanation for the universe. there are two alternatives. One of them I find incredibly improbable. One of them I find improbable, but slightly more probable than the incredibly improbable one. Here's the incredibly improbable one, at least in my opinion. The lucky accident or brute fact hypothesis. The fact that a life-permitting universe exists is just a coincidental fact that neither has nor requires an explanation. Our existence is just an extraordinarily lucky accident. Okay, so there's no explanation is the answer here. It just kind of happened that we live in a universe where everything is really finely calibrated for embodied conscious life that is intelligent like we are. Okay, I find the brute fact hypothesis to be implausible, really implausible. So as implausible as claiming that a picture of the face of Lincoln was just the result of an ink spill. It could happen, but the odds against it are really, really, really long. Okay, a more plausible alternative is the multiverse hypothesis. Okay, so let me camp on this for just a minute because I think this is a little bit more plausible as an atheist alternative. Perhaps if we spilled ink enough times, we could get the face of Lincoln. Okay, according to the multiverse hypothesis, there are an enormous number of universes with different initial conditions, values for the constants of physics, and even the laws of nature. Like trillions of possible universes, quadrillions of possible universes. Thus, simply by chance, some universe will have the winning combination, explaining why a life-permitting universe like ours exists. And we happen to have won. So on this view, the multiverse hypothesis, humans are winners of a cosmic lottery. There are many, 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 many different universes, and human beings are the winners of the cosmic lottery in our universe. To use my 5-year-old's way of explaining large numbers, there are 100 universes. That's the way she says it. Okay. All right. The 3-year-old set up a store for their toys in the living room the other day. And she said, you guys can all come and buy toys. And the 5-year-old didn't want to pay, right? So the 5-year-old comes up and just takes one of the articles of merchandise and runs off. And the 3-year-old throws a fit, right? And mommy comes in to settle it. And mommy makes the 5-year-old give it back. I think it was like a little accessory for some sort of little people set. Okay. Makes the 5-year-old give it back. Well, the 5-year-old's just humiliated. And mommy says, well, you can purchase it. Okay, fake money, right? You can purchase it. And then she turns to the 3-year-old and says, Maddie, how much are you charging for this? And Maddie, realizing her opportunity, that she can price gouge her sister, thinks about it for a minute and says, $29, which is the biggest number she could think of. Because she's got her sister over a barrel, right? Because the sister's now got to buy it. And at this point, the older one, the 5-year-old, Annie just throws a fit. She says, that's too much, I'm not going to pay it. And she starts crying. This is all fake money, right? Nothing's actually being exchanged. So anyway, she ended up paying the $29. She just sort of hands it over, right? One more on that. They actually had a fight last month because the 5-year-old would not share a make-believe doll with the 3-year-old. This doll did not even exist. And the 3-year-old threw a fit because the 5-year-old would not share the make-believe doll with her. Okay. All right, two prominent advocates of the multiverse hypothesis, Max Tegmark and Martin Reyes. Okay, there are two versions of the multiverse hypothesis. I'm going to zip through these. The most physically viable and widely advocated version of it is the universe generator multiverse hypothesis. This suggests that universes are generated many times. But then you have to explain where the universe generator comes from, which is a problem in itself. And And it would have to be well designed to produce a single life-sustaining universe. Okay, I'm going to zip through this.
What was it? What was the first alternative that you said?
The brute fact hypothesis, then the multiverse hypothesis. There are two possibilities. The brute fact, there is no explanation. And then the multiverse hypothesis, which is that we live in a reality where there are who knows how many quadrillion, quintillion universes, and we just happen to have ended up in the one that is finally calibrated for embodied conscious life, like us, intelligent embodied conscious life. Okay, at best, the many universes generator hypothesis eliminates the quantitative case for design based on the fine-tuning of the constants. The many universes generator still requires precise laws and the right initial conditions in order to function. Thus, the question remains who or what designed the many universes generator, which again, the multiverse hypothesis does not explain. Okay, now I've gotten a little bit technical in this presentation, so let me say a couple summary things. The teleological argument is an argument that points to the complexity of a particular something, in this case, the universe, and says on the basis of this incredible complexity, and I had to get a little bit into the details of the complexity to actually show you guys how complex it is. I could have selected biology, I could have selected chemistry, I selected physics, but we could look at any of a number of different processes in nature and find complexity upon complexity that would stagger our imaginations. Okay, and the teleological argument says where you find complexity, in this case incredible fine-tuning, there the best explanation is that design was the intent. Okay, now it doesn't mean that design had to have been the intent, but it does mean that design is the overwhelmingly likely explanation. Okay, I find this actually to be a convincing account of God's existence, a convincing argument for God's existence. Again, it is probability-based, but I think that when you're looking at the kinds of numbers that I've been pointing to here, the improbability of having constants of physics that are so precise, I think that evidence upon evidence suggests overwhelmingly the existence of design. Okay, so that's just a quick summary comment on this. Questions or thoughts about the teleological argument or this particular version of the argument, the fine-tuning version of the teleological argument for God's existence? Okay, I see some glazed over eyes. Okay, please at least give me a little bit of feedback so I know whether you were able to follow the presentation. Were people able to follow and understand the presentation?
The general outline.
What's that?
General outline of it.
The general outline of it? Okay, fair enough. That's all I wanted. That's fine. You guys don't have to become experts on physics in this class. Although it's a very interesting subject.
It's not interesting when you're teaching it online. Physics is something you really got to teach in person.
Fair enough.
It is very difficult to teach.
Fair enough. I thought very hard about going into math after college. I loved it so much. It was so much fun. But I also loved working with words at the same time, and it was like a deep moment of existential conflict in my life, and words won out, and so I went the route of words instead of numbers. But boy, are numbers so much fun to work with. Some people find that, my wife finds it incredibly frustrating, and here, let me turn the video off.